What is the weight of a heart that chooses to leave the familiar, to step beyond the hearth's warmth into the vast, unyielding unknown? In the quiet corners of the Shire, where the grass hums with the memory of ancient summers, two hobbits, Meriadoc, Brandybuck, and Peregrine, stood at the edge of such a choice. Theirs was not a journey born of ambition or the clamour of glory, but of something deeper, something that stirs in the soul when the world whispers its need. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? Was it duty woven into the fabric of their being like thread through a loom? Or was it love fierce and unyielding for a world they scarcely understood? Let us walk with them, not as heroes clad in the mantle of legend, but as small trembling figures beneath a sky too vast for reckoning, seeking the truth of their own hearts amid the gathering storm. The Shire lies like a dream of peace, its hills soft as the curves of a lullaby, its rivers murmuring secrets to the willows. To Merry and Pippin it was home, not merely a place, but a rhythm, a cadence of days marked by the scent of freshly baked bread, the laughter of kin, and the gentle turning of seasons. Yet even in such a haven there are shadows, not the shadows of malice, but of questions unanswered of a world beyond the hedge that presses against the heart like a memory half forgotten. Merry, with his keen mind and restless curiosity, often gazed eastward from the banks of the Brandywine, his thoughts drifting to tales of elves and men of wars fought in lands where the stars burned brighter and the earth trembled with purpose. Pippin, younger, wilder, carried a spark of mischief, but beneath his laughter lay a hunger for meaning, a longing to know what lay beyond the next hill and the hill after that. In the twilight of an autumn evening, when the air was thick with the scent of apples and the sky burned gold, they sat together beneath an ancient oak. The tree's roots twisted deep into the earth, as if clutching secrets older than the Shire itself. Frodo Baggins, their cousin, had spoken of leaving words heavy with a burden none could name. Gandalf the Wanderer had come and gone, his eyes like storm clouds hiding lightning. The world was shifting, though the Shire slept on, oblivious. Merry's voice broke the silence, soft as the rustle of leaves. "Do you ever wonder, Pippin, what it means to be part of something greater? Not just the Shire, but everything. The tales, the songs, the things we've never seen." Pippin sprawled against the tree, plucked a blade of grass, and studied it as if it held the answer. "I wonder what it feels like," he said at last, "to matter." To matter! Such a small phrase, yet it carries the weight of mountains. For Merry and Pippin, it was not a call to greatness, but a question that gnawed at the edges of their contentment. The Shire was enough until it wasn't. The tales they'd heard as children of Bilbo's adventures of dragons and dwarves were no longer just stories. They were echoes of a world that demanded reckoning. And so when Frodo's path turned toward danger, when the ring of power cast its shadow over the green hills, Merry and Pippin did not hesitate. They chose to follow, not out of obligation, but because to stay would be to betray the stirring in their souls. What is courage, if not the willingness to walk into the dark for the sake of another? Their journey began not with fanfare, but with the quiet tread of hobbit feet through the old forest, where the trees whispered of ancient grudges and the air was thick with memory. Merry, ever the planner, had mapped their route, his mind a tapestry of paths and possibilities. Pippin, less certain, clung to the warmth of his friend's resolve, though his heart trembled at the vastness of the world beyond. The forest was no mere wood, but a living thing, its branches heavy with the weight of time. Here they met Tom Bombadil, a figure of enigma, older than the rivers, his voice, a song that seemed to weave the world together. "Ho, Tom Bombadil, Tom Bombadillo," he sang, and in his presence fear seemed a small thing, a shadow dispelled by the light of his laughter. Yet Tom was not their guide, nor their saviour. He was a reminder, a glimpse of joy untainted by the world's sorrow, a vision of what might be if the heart could hold fast to hope. Merry and Pippin sat by his fire, listening to tales of the elder days of stars born from darkness and rivers carved by the hands of gods. But the ring was ever present, a weight in Frodo's pocket, a whisper in the silence. Merry felt it, though he could not name it, a pull, a shadow that made the fire's warmth seem fleeting. Pippin, too, sensed the change, his jests quieter now, his eyes searching the darkness beyond the hearth. What does it mean to carry a burden not your own, to walk beside a friend whose path leads to places you cannot follow? The road led them to Bree, a town of men, where the air was sharp with suspicion, and the eyes of strangers gleamed with secrets. Here they met Strider, a man of shadow and strength, his face carved by years of wandering. To Merry he was a puzzle, a figure from the tales made flesh, yet cloaked in mystery. To Pippin he was a challenge, a spark to his curiosity, though his heart misgave him at the man's grim silence. The inn at Bree was a place of fleeting refuge, its walls echoing with the clamour of voices, but the shadow of the ring followed. The Black Riders. Nazgul servants of the enemy were abroad, their presence a cold blade against the soul. Merry, ever watchful, felt their malice like a storm gathering on the horizon. Pippin, less guarded, spoke too freely, his words a beacon to those who hunted them. Fear is a subtle thing, a seed that takes root in the quiet moments. In Bree it bloomed. Merry lay awake, his mind racing with the weight of their choice. Had they been fools to leave the Shire? What could two hobbits do against such darkness? Pippin, too, wrestled with doubt, though he hid it behind a smile. Yet, in their fear, there was also resolve. They had chosen this path not for glory, but for Frodo, for the Shire, for the world they loved. And so, when Strider led them into the wild, they followed their small forms, dwarfed by the vastness of the land. The hills of the Weather Hills rose like the bones of the earth, and Weathertop loomed ahead, a sentinel of forgotten kings. The attack on Weathertop was a moment of shattering clarity. The Nazgul came, their screams tearing the night, their blades gleaming with a hunger older than death. Merry and Pippin stood with Frodo, their swords drawn, though their hands trembled. They were no warriors, no heroes of legend, yet they stood. When Frodo fell wounded by the Morgul blade, the world seemed to falter. Merry's heart was a storm of guilt and fury, guilt for his helplessness, fury at the darkness that sought to claim his friend. Pippin, younger, less tempered, felt the weight of his own smallness, a hobbit in a world of giants. Yet in that moment they did not flee. They held their ground, their voices raised in defiance until Strider's fire drove the shadows back. What is faith, if not the choice to stand when all seems lost? Merry and Pippin carried no great wisdom, no ancient power, but they carried love, a love that burned brighter than fear. As they fled Weathertop, Frodo's life hanging by a thread, they bore the weight of their choice. The road to Rivendell was a blur of exhaustion and dread, the wilds of Eriador vast and unforgiving. Yet in their hearts a spark remained, a memory of the Shire of laughter shared beneath an oak of a world worth saving. Rivendell, when they reached it, was a vision of grace, its halls filled with the music of elven voices, its air heavy with the weight of ages. Here they found healing not only for Frodo's body, but for their own battered spirits. In the house of Elrond, Merry and Pippin stood among the great Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir, figures of legend, whose very presence seemed to diminish their own. Yet Elrond's gaze, ancient and piercing, saw them not as small, but as vital. The Council of Elrond was a tapestry of voices, each thread a tale of loss and resolve. The ring must be destroyed, its power broken in the fires of Mount Doom. Frodo, small and weary, took up the burden, his voice steady, though his heart quaked. Merry and Pippin, unasked, stepped forward. "We're coming too," Pippin declared, his voice a spark in the solemn air. Merry nodded, his eyes fixed on Frodo, a silent vow. Why did they choose to follow, not for glory, nor for the songs that might be sung? They chose because to stay behind would be to betray the truth they had glimpsed on Weathertop, the truth that even the smallest heart can tip the scales of fate. The Fellowship of the Ring was formed 9 walkers against the 9 riders, a fragile hope against a rising tide of darkness. Merry and Pippin, hobbits of the Shire, were no longer merely companions. They were bearers of a legacy, their steps part of a song older than the stars. As they left Rivendell, the world opened before them, vast and perilous. The snows of Caradhras tested their resolve, the mines of Moria, their courage. In Moria's depths, where shadows clung like sorrow, they faced the Balrog, a creature of fire and terror. Gandalf's fall was a wound to the soul, a reminder that even the mightiest may falter. Merry and Pippin, weeping, clung to each other, their small forms dwarfed by the grief of loss. Yet they pressed on, driven by the memory of Gandalf's light, by the love that bound them to Frodo, to each other, to the world they sought to save. Lothlorien, the Golden Wood, was a balm to their wounds, a place where time seemed to pause, where the air was heavy with the scent of Eleanor and the whisper of ancient songs. Galadriel, Lady of Light, saw them truly, her eyes like stars that pierce the dark. To Merry, she was a vision of wisdom, a reminder that strength lies not in might, but in understanding. To Pippin, she was a mystery, her words a riddle that stirred his heart. Even the smallest person can change the course of the future, she said, and in her voice they heard the echo of their own purpose. As the fellowship journeyed down the Anduin, the weight of their task grew heavier. Boromir's temptation, the shadow of the ring, pressed against them all. Merry and Pippin, though untouched by its power, felt its presence a coldness that seeped into the heart. At Amon Hen the fellowship broke, shattered by choice and fate. Frodo and Sam departed alone, and Boromir fell his horn, sounding a final desperate call. Merry and Pippin, captured by orcs, were torn from the world they knew, their hearts heavy with guilt and fear. Yet even in captivity, bound and beaten, they did not despair. Merry's mind, sharp as ever, sought escape his thoughts, a map of possibilities. Pippin, defiant, clung to hope, his spirit a spark that refused to fade. The orcs marched them toward Isengard, the world a blur of pain and shadow. But in their hearts, they carried the Shire, the memory of Frodo's courage, the echo of Gandalf's voice. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? It was the same force that sustained them now, a love that endures, a hope that defies the dark. The road ahead was uncertain, the world vast and perilous. Yet Merry and Pippin, small as they were, carried within them a light that no shadow could quench. Their journey was no longer their own, but part of a greater song, a tale of fear and faith, of loss and love that would echo through the ages. And so we leave them for now, hobbits in a world of giants, their hearts turned toward the unknown, their steps a whisper in the symphony of Middle-earth. The world is wide and its shadows are deep, yet even in the clutch of despair, a single spark can defy the dark. Meriadoc, Brandybuck, and Peregrine, took bound by orc chains, marched through a land scarred by war's hunger, their bodies bruised, their hearts heavy with the memory of Amon Hen. The fellowship was broken. Frodo and Sam lost to the river's embrace. Boromir fallen, his horn silent. Yet within Merry and Pippin, small as they were, burned a fire no orc could extinguish. A fire kindled in the Shire, tempered by love and sustained by the unyielding hope that the world might yet be mended. What called them beyond the green hills of home? It was this, the truth, that even in the darkest hour, the heart may choose to endure, to fight to believe. The orc band moved with brutal haste, their iron-shod boots grinding the earth, their voices a cacophony of snarls and curses. Merry stumbled, his wrists raw from the ropes, his mind a whirl of pain and strategy. He was the planner, the one who saw paths where others saw only walls. Beside him, Pippin trudged, his face pale, but his eyes defiant, a spark of mischief still flickering beneath the fear. The orcs drove them toward Isengard, to the Tower of Saruman, where the White Wizard's treachery wove a web of fire and shadow. The land itself seemed to mourn its grasses, trampled its rivers, choked with ash. Yet even here in the desolation of Rohan's borders there was beauty, a fleeting glimpse of starlight, a whisper of wind that carried the scent of distant meadows. Merry's thoughts turned to Frodo, to the ring, to the burden they had all sworn to bear. Had their choice to follow been folly? Had their small strength been enough to tip the scales? Or were they merely leaves caught in a storm too vast for reckoning? Pippin, sensing his friend's turmoil, nudged him, his voice low. "We're still here, Merry. That's something, isn't it?" Merry managed a faint smile, though his heart ached. Pippin's words, simple as they were, held a truth older than the hills to endure: is to resist, to live, is to defy. And so they marched their steps, a quiet rebellion against the dark. The orcs were not a single will, but a fractured host, divided by tribe and ambition. The Uruk-hai of Isengard, tall and merciless, clashed with the smaller cunning orcs of Mordor, their quarrels a storm of blades and curses. Merry, ever watchful, saw opportunity in their discord. He whispered to Pippin, his voice a thread of hope. "If they turn on each other, we might slip away." Pippin nodded, his eyes gleaming with the old mischief. They were no warriors, no masters of guile, yet they were hobbits, resilient, resourceful, and stubborn as the roots of an oak. In the chaos of an orc skirmish, they cut their bonds, their small forms slipping into the tall grasses as the enemy tore itself apart. Freedom was a fleeting thing, a gasp of air before the plunge. The plains of Rohan stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, the shadow of pursuit ever present. Merry's mind raced, mapping the land from half-remembered tales, rivers, to follow hills to hide in. Pippin, less certain, clung to his friend's resolve, though his heart quaked at the vastness of their plight. They were alone, two hobbits in a world of giants, their only weapons, their wits, and the love that bound them to each other. The stars above were cold, their light a reminder of the distance between them and the Shire, yet also a promise that the world endured, that beauty lingered even in the dark. Their flight led them to Fangorn Forest, a place of ancient wrath where the trees themselves seemed to breathe with memory. The air was thick with the scent of moss, and time the branches heavy with secrets older than the mountains. Merry and Pippin, weary and wounded, collapsed beneath a gnarled root, their breaths ragged, their hearts pounding. Here, in the heart of Fangorn, they met Treebeard, an Ent, a shepherd of the forest, his voice a rumble like the earth's own song. "Whom home, young hobbits," he said, his eyes like deep pools of starlight. "What brings such small folk to the shadow of my trees?" Treebeard was no mere creature, but a guardian of the elder days, his roots entwined with the history of Middle-earth. To Merry he was a marvel, a living tale whose every word carried the weight of ages. To Pippin he was a wonder, his slow speech a rhythm that soothed the fear in his heart. They told him their story not as heroes, but as hobbits, small and afraid, yet bound to a purpose greater than themselves. Treebeard listened, his branches creaking like the turning of seasons, his thoughts deep as the roots of the world. "There is a wizard to deal with," he said at last, his voice heavy with resolve. "Saruman has betrayed the green things of the earth. What is legacy, if not the choice to act for a world you may never see?" In Fangorn, Merry and Pippin found not only refuge but purpose. They were no longer merely fugitives but catalysts, their small voices stirring the ancient wrath of the Ents. Treebeard called the Entmoot a gathering of his kin, their voices a symphony of sorrow and anger. Merry and Pippin stood among them, their small forms dwarfed by the towering shepherds, yet their presence was no less vital. They spoke of the Shire, of the trees they loved, of the world they fought for. And in their words the Ents heard the echo of their own grief, the pain of a world scarred by fire and axe. The march of the Ents was a tide of green fury, a reckoning long delayed. Merry and Pippin rode upon Treebeard's branches, their hearts a storm of awe and fear. Isengard loomed before them, its towers black against the sky, its furnaces belching smoke that choked the stars. Saruman's treachery had turned the land to ash, his machines a blasphemy against the earth. Yet the Ents were no mere force, but a song of wrath, their roots tearing stone asunder, their branches shattering the works of iron. Merry watched, his mind racing with the weight of their act. Had their words sparked this? Were they small as they were the flint to this fire? Pippin, younger, less tempered, felt the thrill of the moment, his heart pounding with the rhythm of the Ents' march. Yet beneath his excitement lay a question: what does it mean to wield such power to stir the world to war? The fall of Isengard was no mere victory, but a revelation, a glimpse of the strength that lies in unity, in the courage to stand against the dark. As the waters of the Isen flooded the pits of Saruman's forges, Merry and Pippin stood together, their small forms silhouetted against the ruin, their hearts heavy with the cost of their choice. In the aftermath, they found Orthanc, the tower of Saruman, untouched by the flood, its stone black and unyielding. Here they waited, their minds turning to the fellowship, to Frodo, to the ring. The world was vast, its perils many, yet they had played their part. Treebeard entrusted them with the keeping of Isengard, a task both strange and solemn. Merry, ever the planner, took to it with quiet resolve, his mind mapping the ruins, seeking order in the chaos. Pippin, restless, wandered the broken halls, his heart stirred by the relics of a world he scarcely understood. It was here that they found the Palantir, a seeing stone, its surface dark as a starless night. Pippin, drawn by a hunger he could not name, touched it, his mind ensnared by the will of Sauron. The eye saw him, its gaze a fire that burned the soul. Merry's heart broke at his friend's pain, his hands pulling Pippin from the stone's grasp, his voice a tether in the dark. "Pippin, come back to me," he whispered, and in his words was the love that had carried them from the Shire, a love stronger than fear. Pippin's ordeal was a wound, a reminder of the enemy's reach, yet also a spark that stirred the world to action. Gandalf came no longer the grey but the white, his presence a light that banished despair. He took the Palantir, his eyes heavy with the weight of knowledge. To Merry and Pippin he was both comfort and challenge, his voice a call to press on. "You have done more than you know," he said, and in his words they glimpsed the truth of their journey. They were no longer merely hobbits, but bearers of a legacy, their steps part of a song that echoed through the ages. Gandalf took Pippin to Minas Tirith, to the White City of Gondor, while Merry remained with the Rohirrim, their paths diverging for the first time. Merry's heart ached at the parting, his mind heavy with the weight of their shared trials. Yet he found strength in Theoden, King of Rohan, whose grief and resolve mirrored his own. Merry swore his service to the king, his small sword a symbol of his heart's vow. The Rohirrim were a people of honour, their songs filled with the sorrow of lost days, yet also the fire of hope. Merry, though a hobbit, found kinship in their courage, his heart stirred by their defiance of the dark. The muster of Rohan was a gathering of wills, a tide of hooves and steel that rode to the aid of Gondor. The road to Minas Tirith was a path of shadow, the air heavy with the scent of war. Merry rode with Éowyn, a shield maiden whose heart burned with a fire. He understood a longing to matter, to stand against the dark. They spoke little yet. Their silence was a bond, a shared resolve that needed no words. The fields of the Pelennor loomed before them, a stage for the world's reckoning. The forces of Mordor were a tide of iron and fire, their banners black against the sky. Merry's heart quaked, yet he gripped his sword, his thoughts turning to Pippin, to Frodo, to the Shire. The Battle of the Pelennor. Fields was a storm of steel and sorrow, a clash of wills that shook the earth. Merry fought beside Éowyn, his small form a spark in the chaos. When the Witch King, Lord of the Nazgul, struck, it was Éowyn who faced him, her blade a light in the dark. Merry, unseen, struck true, his sword piercing the shadow, his heart a fire that defied despair. The Witch King fell a scream that tore the sky, and in that moment Merry glimpsed the truth of his journey. He was no hero, no warrior of legend, yet his choice had mattered, his small strength a thread in the tapestry of fate. Wounded, weary Merry lay upon the field, his thoughts drifting to Pippin. What was it that called them beyond the Shire? It was love, a love that endured pain, that defied death, that wove their small lives into the song of the world. The battle raged on, yet Merry's heart was still a quiet truth taking root. He had fought not for glory, but for the hope that the world might endure, that the Shire might remain green, that Frodo's burden might not be in vain. In Minas Tirith, Pippin stood among the guards of the citadel, his heart heavy with the weight of his own trials. The Palantir had scarred him, yet it had also awakened him, his eyes now seeing the world with a clarity he had not known. He served Denethor steward of Gondor, whose grief and madness cast a shadow over the city. Yet Pippin's heart turned to Gandalf, to the hope that burned in the White Rider's eyes. The siege of Minas Tirith was a crucible, a test of will and faith. Pippin, small as he was, stood upon the walls, his voice raised in song, a hobbit's defiance against the dark. The reunion of Merry and Pippin in the Houses of Healing was a moment of grace, a thread of light in the tapestry of war. They clung to each other, their laughter mingling with tears, their hearts a mirror of the Shire's enduring green. Aragorn's hands, kingly and gentle, healed their wounds, yet it was their love that sustained them, a bond stronger than stone. The world was vast, its shadows deep, yet they had faced it together, their small steps, a song that echoed through the ages. As the armies of the West marched to the Black Gate, Merry and Pippin stood side by side, their hearts turned to Frodo, to the ring, to the hope that their choices had not been in vain. The world hung in the balance, its fate a question unanswered. Yet in their hearts they carried the Shire, the memory of an oak's shade, the laughter of kin, the whisper of a world worth saving. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? It was the same force that carried them now, a love that endures, a hope that defies the dark, a song that fades not into silence, but into the eternal. The heart is a fragile thing, a vessel of light and shadow, yet it is also a forge where hope is tempered by trial. Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine. Took hobbits of the Shire stood now in the white city of Minas Tirith, their small forms dwarfed by towers of stone and the weight of a world at war. The battle of the Pelennor Fields had left its marked scars on their bodies, echoes of loss in their hearts. Yet within them burned a fire unquenched, a spark kindled in the green hills of home, fanned by love and sustained by the unyielding truth that even the smallest may shape the song of the ages. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? It was a question that lingered not as a riddle to be solved, but as a melody woven through their steps, a call to stand when all seemed lost, to carry the light when darkness pressed close. The Houses of Healing were a haven of quiet amid the clamour of war, their halls filled with the scent of athalars and the soft murmur of voices. Merry lay upon a cot, his body weak from the Witch King's shadow, his mind heavy with the memory of Éowyn's stand, of his own small stroke that had felled a terror beyond reckoning. Pippin sat beside him, his eyes bright with relief though shadowed by his own trials. The Palantir's fire had scarred him, its gaze a wound that lingered in the silence. Yet in their reunion there was grace, a thread of laughter, a shared glance that carried the warmth of the Shire, the memory of an oak's shade, the promise of a world worth fighting for. Aragorn's hands, calloused yet gentle, had wrought healing his voice, a steady anchor in the storm. "You are stronger than you know," he said. And in his words, Merry and Pippin glimpsed the truth of their journey. They were no warriors, no sages of ancient lore, yet their hearts had borne them through fire and shadow, their choices, a ripple in the tide of fate. Pippin, ever restless, traced the edge of his sword, his thoughts drifting to Frodo, to Sam, to the ring that hung like a storm cloud over the world. "Do you think they're still out there, Merry?" he asked, his voice soft as a prayer. Merry, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, nodded. "They must be. They're hobbits, aren't they?" Hobbits. Such a small word, yet it carried the weight of hills and rivers of laughter, shared over a pint of roots deep in the earth. Merry and Pippin had left the Shire as companions, as friends. But they had become something more, bearers of a legacy, their steps part of a song older than the stars. The war was not ended, the enemy's shadow still vast. Sauron's will pressed against the world, his armies a tide of iron and flame. Yet in Minas Tirith, amid the grief of loss, there was also resolve. The captains of the West gathered their voices, a tapestry of courage and despair. Gandalf Aragorn, Éomer Imrahil, each bore the weight of their people, their choices a thread in the world's reckoning. The decision to march on the Black Gate was a gambit born of desperation, a final stand to draw the eye of Sauron from Frodo's path. Merry and Pippin listened, their hearts heavy with the truth of it. They were not asked to join their wounds a reason to remain behind. Yet to stay was unthinkable. Pippin, his jaw set, spoke first. "If Frodo's out there, we go too." Merry, his eyes bright with quiet fire, nodded. "We've come this far. We'll see it through." Their words were no grand vow, no proclamation of heroism, but a simple truth, a love that bound them to their friend, to the world they sought to save. The march to the Morannon was a journey into shadow, the air thick with the scent of ash, the sky heavy with the weight of Sauron's malice. Merry rode with the Rohirrim, his small form a spark among the sea of spears. His heart turned to Éowyn, now healed, but forever changed. Pippin walked with the men of Gondor, his sword at his side, his thoughts a whirl of fear and hope. The land itself seemed to mourn, its hills scarred, its rivers choked with the refuse of war. Yet even here there was beauty, a fleeting glimpse of starlight, a whisper of wind that carried the memory of greener days. What is faith, if not the choice to walk when the path leads to darkness? Merry and Pippin carried no great wisdom, no ancient power, but they carried love, a love that burned brighter than fear, that sustained them when the world seemed to falter. The Black Gate loomed before them, a moor of iron and stone, its towers black against a sky of flame. The armies of Mordor were a tide of malice, their numbers vast, their banners a mockery of hope. Merry's heart quaked, his hand tight on his sword, his thoughts drifting to the Shire, to the laughter of kin, to the world he fought for. Pippin beside him stood tall, his eyes fixed on the gate, his voice a whisper. For Frodo. The parley at the Black Gate was a moment of stark clarity, the mouth of Sauron's words a blade against the soul. He spoke of Frodo's capture of a hobbit's cloak and sword, his voice a venom that sought to break the heart. Merry felt the world tilt his breath, a ragged gasp, his mind a storm of guilt and despair. Pippin, younger, less tempered, clenched his fists, his eyes burning with defiance. "Lies," he whispered, though his heart trembled. Gandalf's voice, steady as stone, rejected the enemy's terms, his light a beacon in the dark. Yet the shadow of doubt lingered, a weight that pressed against the soul. The battle that followed was a tempest, a clash of steel and fire that shook the earth. Merry fought with the Rohirrim, his sword a spark in the chaos, his heart a fire that defied despair. Pippin stood with the men of Gondor, his small form a flicker among the tide of spears, his voice raised in a hobbit's defiance. The enemy's forces were relentless, their malice a storm that sought to drown the world. Trolls roared, orcs swarmed, and the sky burned with the fire of Sauron's will. Yet the armies of the West held their courage a thread in the tapestry of fate. In the midst of battle, the earth trembled, a rumble that spoke of powers older than the mountains. The ring was destroyed, its power broken in the fires of Mount Doom. Sauron's will faltered, his towers crumbled, his armies fled in disarray. Merry and Pippin, battered and weary, stood together, their eyes turned to the sky, their hearts a storm of awe and relief. Frodo had done it. The world was saved, though the cost was yet to be reckoned. The eagles came their wings a song of grace, bearing Gandalf to the slopes of Orodruin, where Frodo and Sam lay their strength spent, their hearts unbroken. The reunion at the field of Cormallen was a moment of light, a thread of joy in the tapestry of war. Merry and Pippin ran to Frodo and Sam, their laughter mingling with tears, their arms a haven for their friends. The hobbits clung to each other, their small forms a spark in the vastness of the world, their love a fire that no shadow could quench. The men of the West sang their praises, their voices a symphony of gratitude, yet Merry and Pippin sought no glory. They were hobbits, their hearts turned to home, to the Shire, to the world they had fought to save. The coronation of Aragorn, now King Elessar, was a vision of hope, a promise of a world renewed. Merry and Pippin stood among the great, their small forms, a reminder that even the smallest may shape the song of the ages. Aragorn's hands, once a healer's, now bore the weight of a crown, his eyes bright with the fire of a king. To Merry he was a friend, a guide, a light in the dark. To Pippin he was a marvel, a tale made flesh, his presence a spark that stirred the heart. The white tree of Gondor bloomed its petals, a symbol of life reborn, and in its shade the hobbits found peace, though their hearts ached for home. The return to the Shire was a journey of quiet, a path through lands healed and scarred. Merry and Pippin rode with Frodo and Sam, their laughter a thread of light, their silence a weight of memory. The world had changed, and they with it. The Shire, when they reached it, was no longer the haven they had known. Saruman's malice had touched it, its hills scarred, its rivers choked with the refuse of his spite. Merry's heart broke at the sight, his mind a storm of guilt and resolve. Pippin, younger, less tempered, clenched his fists, his eyes burning with defiance. "We'll make it right," he said, and in his words was the fire that had carried them through shadow. The scouring of the Shire was no grand battle, but a reckoning of the heart. Merry and Pippin, now taller, stronger, bore the weight of their journey, their swords a symbol of their resolve. They rallied the hobbits, their voices a call to stand to fight, to reclaim the green hills of home. The Battle of Bywater was a clash of will, a defiance of the shadow that sought to linger. Merry led with quiet strength, his mind a map of strategy, his heart a fire that burned for the Shire. Pippin fought with reckless courage, his laughter a spark in the chaos, his love a light that no darkness could quench. Saruman fell, his power broken, his malice a whisper in the wind. The Shire was freed, its hills green once more, its rivers singing with the memory of ancient summers. Merry and Pippin stood together, their eyes turned to the horizon, their hearts heavy with the cost of their journey. Frodo, their friend, their guide, bore a wound that would not heal, his eyes bright with a sorrow they could not share. The grey havens loomed a final parting, a thread of loss in the tapestry of their lives. At the shores of the sea, Merry and Pippin stood with Sam, their hearts a storm of grief and love. Frodo's farewell was a wound, a silence that lingered in the soul. Yet in his eyes they saw peace, a light that spoke of healing beyond the world's rim. "I have been too deeply hurt," he said, and in his words was the truth of their journey, a truth of sacrifice, of love that endures beyond the breaking of the heart. The ship sailed its sails white against the sky, and Merry and Pippin clung to each other, their tears a river that carried the memory of their friend. The return to Bag End was a quiet thing, a step into a world both familiar and strange. Merry and Pippin sat together, their pipes lit, their eyes turned to the stars. The Shire was green, its hills a song of peace, yet their hearts carried the weight of all they had seen, all they had done. What called them beyond the Shire? It was love, a love that bore them through fire and shadow, that shaped the song of the world, that lingered in the silence of a hobbit's heart. They were no heroes, no warriors of legend, yet their choices had mattered, their small steps, a melody that echoed through the ages. The years that followed were a tapestry of joy and sorrow, of laughter shared and losses borne. Merry returned to Buckland. His heart turned to the Brandywine, his mind a map of the Shire's future. Pippin took up his place in Tookland, his laughter a spark that lit the hills, his courage a fire that warmed the heart. They were older now, their hair streaked with silver, yet their eyes carried the light of their journey, the memory of a world saved, of a love that endured. The Shire flourished, its hills green, its rivers clear, a haven of peace in a world forever changed. Yet in the quiet moments when the stars burned bright and the wind whispered of distant lands, Merry and Pippin's thoughts turned to Frodo, to Sam, to the fellowship that had bound them to the world's fate. The Red Book. Frodo's tale lay open before them, its pages a song of courage and loss, of small hands that shaped the course of the future. They added their own words, their voices a thread in the tapestry, their story a whisper in the symphony of Middle-earth. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? It was a question that needed no answer, for it was woven into their lives, their choices, their love. They had walked through shadow, stood against the dark, and returned to the green hills of home, their hearts a forge where hope was tempered by trial. The world was vast, its shadows deep, yet they had carried the light, their small steps, a song that faded not into silence, but into the eternal. And so we leave them for now, hobbits in a world of memory, their eyes turned to the stars, their hearts a melody that lingers in the wind. The world turns, and its seasons weave a tapestry of memory, each thread a whisper of what was and what might yet be. In the Shire, where the hills cradle the laughter of hobbits and the rivers sing of ancient summers, Meriadoc, Brandybuck, and Peregrine walked as figures both familiar and changed their hearts, bearing the weight of a journey that had reshaped the world. The scouring of the Shire had cleansed their home, its green restored its peace, a fragile hymn. Yet the silence of Frodo's departure lingered, a wound that throbbed in the quiet moments, a reminder that even the greatest victories carry the shadow of loss. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? It was a melody that echoed still, a song of love and sacrifice, of small hands that held the light when darkness sought to claim all. Now, in the aftermath, they stood at the threshold of a new chapter, their steps a continuation of the tale that had begun beneath an oak's shade. The Shire was alive with the rhythm of renewal. Hobbiton bustled its gardens, blooming with the vigour of a land reborn. Bag End, once scarred by Saruman's malice, stood proud, its door bright, its windows aglow with the warmth of Samwise Gamgee's hearth. Merry and Pippin, now taller, their cloaks bearing the sigils of Rohan and Gondor, were no longer merely hobbits of the Shire. They were the Thane's heir and the Master's son, their names whispered with awe by those who had heard the tales of their deeds. Yet to each other they were Merry and Pippin friends, bound by laughter and tears, their hearts a mirror of the Shire's enduring green. Merry, ever the planner, took to his duties with a quiet resolve. In Buckland, by the banks of the Brandywine, he walked the paths of his youth, his mind a map of the Shire's future. The old forest loomed nearby, its shadows, a memory of their first steps into the unknown. He spoke with the hobbits of Buckland, his voice steady, his eyes bright with the fire of one who had seen the world's edge and returned. "We've fought for this," he said, his words simple yet heavy. "Let's keep it green." His hands, once trembling with a sword, now planted saplings their roots, a promise of days to come. Yet in the silence of evening, when the stars burned bright, Merry's thoughts turned to Frodo, to the sea, to the light that had sailed beyond the world's rim. Pippin, restless and bright, returned to Tookland, his laughter a spark that lit the hills. The great smiles buzzed with his presence, his tales of Ents and kings, a fire that warmed the heart. He was no longer the reckless youth who had spoken too freely in Bree, but a hobbit tempered by trial, his mischief tempered by wisdom. Yet the Palantir's shadow lingered, its fire a memory that stirred in the dark. Pippin bore it quietly, his smile a shield, his heart turned to the Shire's joy. He danced at festivals, his voice raised in song, yet in the quiet moments he sat with the Red Book, its pages a bridge to Frodo, to the journey that had shaped them all. What is legacy, if not the choice to sow hope, where sorrow has walked Merry and Pippin, though parted by duty, remained bound by the thread of their shared path. They met often, their pipes lit their laughter, a melody that carried the memory of simpler days. Beneath the party tree, where Bilbo's farewell had once echoed, they spoke of the world beyond, of Rohan's plains, of Gondor's towers, of the fellowship that had woven their lives into the song of Middle-earth. "Do you ever miss it?" Merry Pippin asked one evening, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Merry, his pipe trailing smoke, smiled faintly. The danger, no. The purpose, always purpose. It was a word that lingered, a weight that pressed against the heart. The Shire was enough, yet it was not. The world had called them once, and though they had returned, its echo remained. Merry felt it in the tales he told, each word a spark that stirred the young hobbits of Buckland. Pippin sensed it in the songs he sang their notes, a call to dream beyond the hedge. They were no longer merely companions of Frodo, but stewards of a truth that even the smallest may shape the course of the future, that love is a fire that endures beyond the breaking of the world. The years flowed like the Brandywine, their current gentle yet relentless. Samwise, now mayor, tended the Shire with a gardener's care, his hands planting the seeds of Galadriel's gift, his heart a haven for Rosie and their children. Merry and Pippin watched their smiles warm their hearts, heavy with the memory of Frodo's absence. The Red Book grew its pages filled with Sam's careful hand, with Merry's precise notes, with Pippin's flourishes of joy. It was no mere chronicle, but a song, a testament to the courage of hobbits, to the love that had carried them through shadow. Yet the world beyond the Shire did not fade. Letters came from Aragorn, now King Elessar, his words a bridge between Gondor and the Green Hills. Merry and Pippin read them together, their eyes bright with the memory of Minas Tirith of the White Tree's bloom. Éowyn and Faramir sent tidings, their voices a whisper of the Pellennor's fire. Merry, his heart stirred, wrote back, his hand steady, his words a thread of friendship that spanned the miles. Pippin, ever impulsive, added his own notes, his laughter spilling onto the page. The world was vast, its bonds enduring, and the hobbits of the Shire were no longer apart from it. In Buckland, Merry built a library, its shelves filled with scrolls and books, a haven for the tales of Middle-earth. He walked its halls, his steps slow, his mind a tapestry of memory. The old forest's songs, Tom Bombadil's laughter, Treebeard's rumble, they lived here woven into the pages he guarded. Young hobbits came, their eyes wide, their questions a spark that lit his heart. "Tell us of the Ents," they begged, and Merry smiled, his voice a river that carried them to Fangorn's shade. He was no sage, no wizard, yet his words were a light, a reminder that the world was wide, its wonders many. In Tookland, Pippin gathered the young, his tales a fire that burned bright. He spoke of Gandalf's light, of Aragorn's strength, of Frodo's quiet courage. His laughter mingled with theirs, his songs a call to dream. Yet in the quiet moments he stood at the edge of the hills, his eyes turned eastward, his heart stirred by the memory of the Palantir's fire. It was no curse, but a reminder, a truth that even the smallest may face the dark and endure. Pippin bore it, his smile a shield, his love a fire that warmed the heart. What is silence if not the space where memory sings in the Shire? Merry and Pippin found peace, yet also longing. The world had changed, and they with it. They were no longer the hobbits who had left Bag End, their hearts light, their steps untested. They had faced the Witch King stirred, the Ents stood at the Black Gate. Their hands had shaped the world, their choices a thread in its song. Yet the Shire was home, its hills a haven, its rivers a melody that soothed the soul. They walked its paths, their pipes lit, their laughter a spark that lit the dark. The years brought new joys, new sorrows. Merry married Estella Bolger, her smile a light that warmed his heart. Their children ran through Buckland, their laughter a echo of the Shire's green. Pippin wed Diamond of Longcleave, her eyes bright with the fire of Tookland's hills. Their son Faramir bore the name of a friend, a promise of bonds unbroken. Sam's family grew his children a garden of joy, his love for Rosie a fire that burned bright. The Shire flourished, its hills alive with the rhythm of hobbit life, its peace a testament to the courage of those who had fought for it. Yet in the quiet moments when the stars burned bright and the wind whispered of distant lands, Merry and Pippin's thoughts turned to the sea. Frodo's farewell was a wound that lingered, a silence that sang in the heart. They spoke of it rarely, their words, a thread of grief, yet also of hope. "He found peace," Merry said one evening, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Pippin nodded, his smile faint. "And we'll find him again someday." Their words were no vow, but a truth, a love that endured beyond the world's rim, a light that burned in the dark. The Red Book was their legacy, its pages a song of courage and loss. Merry and Pippin added to it, their hands careful, their hearts heavy with the weight of memory. They wrote of the Shire, of the fellowship, of the world they had saved. Their words were no boast, but a gift, a reminder that even the smallest may shape the course of the future, that love is a fire that endures beyond the breaking of the heart. Young hobbits read it, their eyes wide, their dreams stirred by the tales of their kin. The world beyond called, still its echo, a whisper in the heart. Merry and Pippin travelled to Rohan, to Gondor, their steps a bridge between the Shire and the realms of men. In Edoras they stood with Éomer, now king, his eyes bright with the fire of his people. Merry's heart stirred at the sight of the plains. His thoughts turned to Theoden, to the charge of the Rohirrim. In Minas Tirith they walked with Aragorn his crown, a symbol of hope, his hands a healer's still. Pippin's laughter echoed in the citadel, his voice a spark that lit the heart. The white tree bloomed its petals, a promise of days to come, and the hobbits of the Shire were no longer strangers to the world. What is hope, if not the choice to dream when the night is darkest? Merry and Pippin, now older, their hair streaked with silver, carried the light of their journey, their hearts a forge where memory was tempered by love. The Shire was their home, its hills a haven, yet their eyes turned ever to the horizon, their thoughts to the sea. They were no heroes, no warriors of legend, yet their choices had mattered, their small steps, a melody that echoed through the ages. The world was vast, its shadows deep, yet they had walked its paths, their hands a spark that lit the dark. In Buckland, Merry stood by the Brandywine, his eyes fixed on the water, his heart a river that carried the memory of his journey. The old forest sang its shadows, a whisper of the unknown, yet also of the courage that had carried him through. In Tookland, Pippin walked the hills, his laughter a fire that warmed the heart, his eyes bright with the memory of the world's wonders. The Shire was green, its peace a testament to the love that had fought for it, yet the sea called its voice, a melody that lingered in the soul. The years flowed, their current gentle, yet relentless. Merry and Pippin, now old, their steps slower, sat together beneath the party tree, their pipes lit, their eyes turned to the stars. The red book lay open before them, its pages a song of courage and loss of small hands that shaped the course of the future. They spoke of Frodo, of Sam, of the fellowship that had bound them to the world's fate. Their words were a thread of memory, a light that burned in the dark. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? It was a question that needed no answer, for it was woven into their lives, their choices, their love. They had walked through shadow, stood against the dark, and returned to the green hills of home, their hearts a forge where hope was tempered by trial. The world was vast, its shadows deep, yet they had carried the light, their small steps, a song that faded not into silence, but into the eternal. And so we leave them for now, hobbits in a world of memory, their eyes turned to the stars, their hearts a melody that lingers in the wind, a promise of the sea that waits beyond. The stars burn eternal their light, a song that weaves the tapestry of time, yet even their radiance cannot hold back the tide of years. In the Shire, where the hills cradle the memory of ancient summers and the rivers murmur secrets to the willows, Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine. Took stood as elders, their hair silver, their eyes bright with the fire of a journey that had shaped the world. The Shire was green, its peace, a hymn sung by hobbit voices, its fields alive with the rhythm of life. Yet the sea called its voice, a whisper in the heart, a melody that spoke of endings and beginnings, of a love that endured beyond the world's rim. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? It was a question that had carried them through fire and shadow, through laughter and loss, and now in the twilight of their days it lingered still, a song that faded not into silence, but into the eternal. The Shire was a haven, its hills a testament to the courage of those who had fought for it. Hobbiton bloomed its gardens a riot of colour, its paths worn by the tread of joyful feet. Bag End stood proud, its hearth warm with Samwise Gamgee's love, its halls filled with the laughter of his children. Merry and Pippin, now the master of Buckland and the Thane of Tookland, were figures of legend, their names woven into the tales told by firelight. Yet to each other they were simply Merry and Pippin friends, bound by a love stronger than stone, their hearts a mirror of the Shire's enduring green. Merry walked the banks of the Brandywine, his steps slow, his mind a tapestry of memory. The old forest loomed nearby, its shadows a whisper of their first steps into the unknown, of Tom Bombadil's laughter, of the courage that had carried them through. His library in Buckland was a sanctuary, its shelves heavy with the tales of Middle-earth, its air thick with the scent of parchment and time. Young hobbits came, their eyes wide, their questions a spark that lit his heart. "Tell us of the king," they begged, and Merry smiled, his voice a river that carried them to Minas Tirith, to the white trees' bloom. He was no sage, no wizard yet. His words were a light, a reminder that the world was wide, its wonders many. Pippin, ever restless, roamed the hills of Tookland, his laughter a fire that warmed the heart. The great smiles buzzed with his presence, his songs a call to dream beyond the hedge. He was no longer the reckless youth who had touched the Palantir, but a hobbit tempered by trial, his mischief a spark that burned bright. Yet the memory of Sauron's gaze lingered a shadow that stirred in the quiet moments. Pippin bore it quietly, his smile a shield, his love a fire that endured. He gathered the young, their voices a chorus of joy, and told them of Gandalf's light, of Aragorn's strength, of Frodo's quiet courage. His tales were no boast, but a gift, a reminder that even the smallest may shape the course of the future. What is time if not the space where love takes root? Merry and Pippin, though parted by duty, remained bound by the thread of their shared path. They met often, their pipes lit their laughter, a melody that carried the memory of simpler days. Beneath the party tree where Bilbo's farewell had once echoed, they spoke of the world beyond, of Rohan's plains, of Gondor's towers, of the fellowship that had woven their lives into the song of Middle-earth. "Do you ever wonder," Merry Pippin asked one evening, his eyes fixed on the stars, "what lies beyond the sea?" Merry, his pipe trailing smoke, nodded faintly. "I wonder what Frodo found there. Peace, I hope." Peace. It was a word that lingered, a weight that pressed against the heart. The Shire was enough, yet it was not. The world had called them once, and though they had returned, its echo remained. Merry felt it in the letters he wrote to Aragorn, each word a bridge to the White City. Pippin sensed it in the songs he sang, their notes a call to the horizon. They were no longer merely companions of Frodo, but stewards of a truth that love is a fire that burns beyond the breaking of the world, that even the smallest heart may tip the scales of fate. The Red Book was their legacy, its pages a song of courage and loss. Merry and Pippin added to it, their hands careful, their hearts heavy with the weight of memory. They wrote of the Shire, of the fellowship of the world they had saved. Their words were a thread in the tapestry, a light that burned in the dark. Sam, now old, his hair grey, his hands worn by a gardener's care, guarded the book, his love for Frodo a fire that warmed the heart. The hobbits of the Shire read it, their eyes wide, their dreams stirred by the tales of their kin. The years brought new joys, new sorrows. Merry's children grew, their laughter a echo of Buckland's green. His son, named for Theoden, bore the fire of Rohan in his eyes, a reminder of the bonds that spanned the miles. Pippin's son, Faramir, ran through Tookland, his smile a spark that lit the hills, his name a promise of friendship unbroken. Sam's family flourished, his children a garden of joy, his love for Rosie a fire that burned bright. The Shire was alive, its hills a hymn of peace, its rivers a melody that soothed the soul. Yet in the quiet moments when the stars burned bright and the wind whispered of distant lands, Merry and Pippin's thoughts turned to the sea. Frodo's farewell was a wound that lingered, a silence that sang in the heart. They spoke of it rarely, their words, a thread of grief, yet also of hope. "He's out there somewhere," Pippin said one evening, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Merry nodded, his smile faint. "And we'll find him someday." Their words were no vow, but a truth, a love that endured beyond the world's rim, a light that burned in the dark. The world beyond called still its echo, a whisper in the heart. Merry and Pippin travelled to Rohan, to Gondor, their steps a bridge between the Shire and the realms of men. In Edoras they stood with Éomer, now old, his eyes bright with the fire of his people. Merry's heart stirred at the sight of the plains. His thoughts turned to Theoden, to the charge of the Rohirrim. In Minas Tirith they walked with Aragorn, his crown a symbol of hope, his hands a healer's still. Pippin's laughter echoed in the citadel, his voice a spark that lit the heart. The white tree bloomed its petals, a promise of days to come, and the hobbits of the Shire were no longer strangers to the world. But the years were relentless, their tide a force that none could hold. Merry and Pippin now old, their steps slow felt the weight of time. Their hair was silver, their hands worn, yet their eyes carried the light of their journey, the memory of a world saved, of a love that endured. The Shire was their home, its hills a haven, yet the sea called its voice, a melody that lingered in the soul. They knew, as all hobbits know, that the world turns, that endings come, that the heart must answer when the time is right. In their final years, Merry and Pippin made a choice not born of fear, but of love. They left the Shire, their steps steady, their hearts turned to the south. Sam stood at their parting, his eyes bright with tears, his hands clasping theirs. "You'll find him," he said, and in his words was the truth of their journey, a love that bound them beyond the breaking of the world. The road to Gondor was a path of memory, each step a echo of their youth, of the fellowship of the world they had fought for. In Minas Tirith they lived as honoured guests, their presence a light in the White City. Aragorn, now old, his hair grey, welcomed them, his eyes bright with the fire of a king. Éowyn and Faramir, their faces lined with years, clasped their hands, their smiles a thread of friendship unbroken. Merry and Pippin walked the streets of Gondor, their laughter a spark that lit the heart, their tales a song that warmed the soul. The white tree bloomed its petals, a promise of life reborn, and the hobbits of the Shire were no longer merely visitors, but part of the city's light. Yet the sea called its voice a melody that could not be denied. Merry and Pippin, now frail their steps, faltering, knew the time had come. They stood at the edge of the world, their eyes turned to the west, their hearts a storm of grief and hope. The grey havens loomed its shores, a threshold between the known and the unknown. No ship waited, for they were not of the Eldar yet. Their hearts sailed their love, a light that burned beyond the world's rim. Merry passed first, his breath a whisper, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Pippin held his hand, his tears a river that carried the memory of their journey. "We did it, Merry," he said, and in his words was the truth of their lives, a love that had carried them through shadow, a courage that had shaped the world. Pippin followed soon after his laughter, a spark that lingered in the air, his heart a fire that warmed the dark. They were laid to rest in Gondor, their tombs beside Aragorn's, a testament to the bonds that had woven their lives into the song of Middle-earth. Sam, now alone, returned to the Shire, his heart heavy with the weight of loss. The Red Book was his comfort, its pages a song of courage and love, of small hands that had shaped the course of the future. He added their final tale, his hand steady, his tears a river that watered the heart. The Shire was green, its hills a hymn of peace, yet Sam's eyes turned to the sea, his heart stirred by the memory of his friends. In the years that followed, the Shire flourished its tales, a light that burned in the dark. The Red Book passed to Sam's children, its pages a bridge to the past, a promise of the future. The hobbits of the Shire sang of Merry and Pippin, their voices a chorus of joy, their laughter a spark that lit the heart. They were no heroes, no warriors of legend, yet their choices had mattered, their small steps a melody that echoed through the ages. What called Merry and Pippin beyond the Shire? It was a question that needed no answer, for it was woven into their lives, their choices, their love. They had walked through shadow, stood against the dark, and returned to the green hills of home, their hearts a forge where hope was tempered by trial. The world was vast, its shadows deep, yet they had carried the light, their small steps, a song that faded not into silence, but into the eternal. And so we leave them not as figures of legend, but as hobbits. Merry and Pippin, friends bound by laughter and tears, their hearts a melody that lingers in the wind. The sea sings its voice, a promise of reunion, of a light that burns beyond the world's rim. The Shire endures its hills, a testament to their love, its stars a song that carries their names. What called them beyond? It was love, a love that bore them through fire and shadow, that shaped the song of the world that lives in the heart of every hobbit, every soul that dares to dream, to fight to hope. Their tale is ended, yet it is not finished, for it lives in the green of the Shire, in the light of the stars, in the eternal song of Middle-earth.